So this is our March meeting of the Diamond Valley Writers Guild, March 2021. And I'll start the program as I do always, as Lynn always did. Does anybody have anything new to report in terms of selling a book, of starting a book, of ending a book, of reading a book? So is there, George.
Well, I mentioned to a couple of you way before the beginning that I've got Wang story number 6 is now in final format to go to the publisher. So that'll be coming out. Conflicted Justice should come out in about a month and a half.
All
Great
right.
story.
Great.
Hey, good.
Anybody else? Kathleen?
Well, let Karen go first. Go ahead.
Okay, Karen, go ahead.
I have my Pandemonium and my More for Less books, both up on Amazon and 12 other retailers as an ebook now.
All right.
Yay.
All right, Kathleen, you had something.
Yes, the anthology I was working on with 9 other authors is on Amazon and 12 other retailers right now. And we did a launch. We did a interview of all of the authors. I conducted it, and that was a good success. We posted it on YouTube.
All right.
What's
Terrific.
the title, Kathleen?
What's the
Oh,
title?
I'm sorry. It's called Tolerance, a collection of short stories. It was dedicated to 2020 because of all the intolerance.
All right. Terrific. Anybody else? Do I see? Well, I have one about myself. Once the pandemic hit earlier this year, I sold a book called The Carney Way. Turns out, like our last meeting, the very next Monday, a company contacted me on a Western that I had written called Storm Riders. They not only accepted it, they're giving me a contract for a series.
Woohoo!
Yeah, so that's kind of exciting.
Yeah.
The acquisition editor was very high on it. And the company is called 5 Star, and they've had more Spur Award winners than any other publishing company in the U.S. They're a subsidy of a major, one of the 5, the big ones, which one I can't remember. But 5 Star, they publish mainly Westerns and mysteries. And so I'm excited about that. I'll be more excited when it becomes a bestseller and they make it into a fantastic film, and I get a small part in it.
Yeah.
As long as you're going to dream big, Jim.
That's right. Let's see. Well, Lynn is not here. I was going to ask her to say something about Facebook and all, but she does not seem to be here yet.
She is in Sanibel, Fort
She's in
Myers
Florida.
area until
Okay.
Monday.
Yeah.
All right, Karen, you have something.
I just wanted to say on my 2 books, I'm working on making them into audio books, and I'm really excited about that. So if anybody else is doing that, it would be fun to talk about it together.
I did one for audio for myself. I did a short story. It's on audio. You can find it on there.
Yeah, I'm not going to do it myself.
Yeah. Well, it's. I would never do another one. It was like a 12 or 15-page short story, and it took me 7 hours to record.
Oh, wow.
So
I learned from your mistake.
yes. There you go. Okay, well, Michelle, how about membership? Michelle, tell us.
Membership. We can always use more members. It is very, very easy to join our guild. You can either go on PayPal and join, and I'll let Joe explain how to do that because that's a financial thing and I have no idea how that works. But you can do that, or you can send a check. I will put in the chat our PO box. It's $20. If you haven't already joined, we'd appreciate it. With the pandemic and with the fact that we're not having live meetings, our membership roster is a little down, and we do have expenses. as any nonprofit organization does, Zoom and website maintenance, and there's a lot of little things that add up over the course of the year. And the way that we fund that and keep these programs coming is people's $20 membership renewal. So if you haven't already, you can either email the Guild and talk to me about it, or just mail in a check for $20 made out to Diamond Valley Writers Guild. I'm very happy to report we do have at this point 45 paid members, which is great. We're down to a little bit more than half of our normal membership pre-pandemic. Usually we ended up with somewhere around between 80 and 90 members is where we had been for the last maybe 3 or 4 years. So it is impacting our ability to potentially bring programs of value, and I'd love to keep the programs coming. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, Joe, how can people join?
You can Google PayPal and follow the instructions on screen to Diamond Valley Writers Guild, and they make sure we get our money.
Okay. There's also a link, I believe, on Facebook, isn't there?
There may be. I don't know.
I know that there's something on the website for sure.
Or on the website, website. There's a link there also, I believe. Okay. Next is our monthly writing tip from Sandy. And Sandy, it is.
I did notice that Dennis just joined us, and I think he has some success to share with everybody.
I think he does too.
Oh, Dennis, yeah, tell us.
Hello, everybody. I'll just tell you that recently I was able to sign with an agent, and Sharon Elliott Norris has been in the business for years, and she is a true professional. And actually, one of the benefits is we all got together who were the people she represents, and all of us, and we had a wonderful opportunity to just share, learn about strategies, and hear from her in terms of wisdom about how all of us can be better writers. And so that's been very exciting, and I'm just looking forward to a long relationship with her. And she's going to start marketing my book, but I've also undergone the whole platform building process of website design and gone through that, and remake and branding and all of those things that I'm working on to make sure that I'll drive traffic to my site. So this is very exciting news for me, but I'm also very encouraged for all of you. I just want you to know that there is a possibility of moving from serious hobbyist to professional, and that is a door that opens for you. And sometimes you get to the point where you realize that you move from one level to more professional, and it's just very exciting to have that opportunity. So I'll let other people comment.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. I appreciate that. Sandy,
congratulations.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. Congratulations. That's terrific. And Sandy, back to you. And
this morning, I'm sharing with you about using surprise in your writing. And I have taken this from Jane Cleland's book, Mastering Suspense, Structure, and Plot. In 1962, Alfred Hitchcock and Francois Truffaut had days of conversation. And that's supposed to have been the point at which he outlined his famous suspense versus surprise. So he said, now theoretically, this is exactly what Hitchcock did, but I'd have to tell you theoretically, as my sister would say, I wasn't there with a flashlight, so I can't really swear to the veracity of that. Anyway, he says you have a scene where two characters are talking in a cafe and a bomb suddenly goes off under the table. The unexpected action causes the audience to experience surprise. Hitchcock explained it's not unlike a child with a jack-in-a-box for the first time. Your total focus is on that moment. You are absorbed. You don't think of anything else. You don't notice anything else. That's the power of surprise. If you contrast that with this one. You witness a man approaching a cafe where two people are drinking coffee, enjoying a pleasant morning chat. You see the man step behind a column and turn an old-fashioned alarm clock to 1 o'clock. It's taped to a bomb. A clock mounted on a nearby wall informs you it's 12:45. You can watch as the clock ticks down the time period. Now it's 12:49. The people keep chatting. Now it's 12:52. The woman laughs. It's 12:57. They finish their coffee. And now it's 12:59. So how do you, as the reader or the viewer, feel? You're probably holding your breath, or you're waiting for the hero to dash in and save the day. In this approach, you have the viewer or reader as unsuspecting for a full 15 minutes, whereas the immediate explosion brought you approximately 15 seconds of surprise. So Jane, I'm quoting Jane Cleland now, if suspense is so much more gripping than surprise, and if the effect is more lasting, why employ surprise at all? First, surprise can spark delight in a reader all on its own. And second, it is one of the most reliable ways to launch your readers into situations fraught with heightened tension, the cornerstone of suspense. So as we all know, surprises come in two forms. There are good ones, there are bad ones. But in each instance, the basis is they're unforeseen. But you can set up surprises, Cleland says, in your writing that are fitting and not merely plunked down for effect. They should be logical to the situation, and it'll help gain momentum and that sort of thing. So how do you do that? And she says, consider opposites. You want to avoid just out of nowhere situations. If you are writing a traditional mystery, for example, you cannot at the end reveal that it was an alien. That's not a surprise. That's just cheating, as she would say. So when writing about that surprise, you need to let the story do the talking and avoid false urgency words and phrases like out of nowhere and unexpectedly. So in order to have surprises, you want to integrate them carefully so you maintain control of your structure and your pacing and not use too many of them. So don't mistake a final startling denouement that includes a surprise for a contrived moment at the end where your readers go, huh? So that said, surprise endings, if done well, are ideal. A solution that readers don't see coming, but which revealed feels inevitable, is a true reader pleasure. She pointed out Gone Girl and The Girl on the Train as having structured, very nice endings. And I think back to the short stories Guy de Maupassant used to write. I loved The Necklace and The Gift of the Magi and how those surprises were very, very pleasant. So in conclusion, it's possible not only for surprise and suspense to work in conjunction, but for the unexpected action to boost the overall effective suspense in your story.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. I'd like to point out that my wife just pointed out to me that one of the great surprise endings is one of the very short story by
Kate Chopin.
Kate Chopin called Story of an Hour.
Yes,
which is
that's one of my absolute favorite short stories.
Great short story ending. I also like to point out in Hitchcock, if you think about it, isn't one of the great surprise endings of all time Psycho? The first time you see it, if you know nothing about that movie, the end of that is shocking at the same time. It's absolutely logical.
But in some ways, we should have been prepared, because whenever he does it, he's dressed like mama.
Yes. But that's just one of those great surprise endings that he has.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the great ones of all time. Yep, it's all perfectly logical.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you, Sandy. It's a great one. Ellen, you are up with
Straight Jackets Magazine. Straight Jackets
Yes.
Magazine. Okay, the spring issue is coming up. The deadline to submit is April 1st. So you have 4 days, folks. If you have anything you'd like to submit, we'd love to read it. We're also working on the Best of Straight Jackets Magazine. We're meeting once a week and just going through everything. We'll put that aside while we do the magazine. And you can expect to see the magazine mid-April. And I just wanted to share one thing with you. I was listening to an Anne Lamott TED Talk the other day, and I wanted to share this, something she said, especially for those of you who are writing memoir. If people want you to write warmly about them, they should have behaved better.
Right.
Excellent. I got a kick out of that, and I thought you might too. Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you. I came across a great Toni Morrison quote. She said, if there is a book that you would like to read but hasn't been written, then write it.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was a great quote by Toni Morrison. Okay, now we're going to move on to our speaker, and Joe is going to introduce Kathy, who's been with us before. Joe, it's up to you now.
Well, I'm
Real quick,
delighted
could
that
everyone real quick, could everyone mute who isn't speaking, because
I will
we're
mute
getting some
all
background.
now, and I will
Okay.
unmute Joe and our speaker. Okay,
Thank you.
everybody is now muted, and let me find Joe on here.
She's right down there. What, you just moved here, right there.
Okay,
And then
okay,
Kathy-
Joe, just unmute yourself. Did I mute myself? No, I'm on.
Well, I'm delighted to
Okay,
be
there.
able to introduce a local author, excuse me, one who has a wealth of experience, 57 books to her credit, and those are just the ones that she's written on her own. She's also collaborated with other authors. She's an international author and award-winning, and is also a professional editor. So I think we have things to learn today. Kathy, please welcome Kathy Macias.
All right.
Thank you all so much. That's great. Yeah, it was actually a little more fun last year when we could all get together face to face, but hopefully
Yes.
that'll be again hopefully soon. But at least we have this. This is great. It keeps us all in touch. So yeah, there's actually a couple of things I want to just talk about today and touch on. The first one is editing. Self-editing versus professional editing, how they go together, and when we know if we need it and that sort of thing. So the second thing will be more about research, particularly if you're doing something foreign or historical. Obviously, we're going to need some research somewhere we don't actually live in today. So there's things that we need to go find out about. And I've really learned some interesting things on that along the way. But first, we'll talk about the editing. All of us need to edit. That's just all there is to it. We all have to polish our work. What we put down first is not what we want to send to the publisher. The only time I've ever had someone tell me otherwise was when someone, and this happened more than once, will hand me something and say, God gave this to me. And I'm looking at it and thinking, I'm pretty sure God knows how to spell. So I'm having a problem with what I'm looking at. It's just, and that puts me in a position of, okay, if I want to challenge her work and say she needs to change something, I'm obviously challenging God and saying he's wrong. And that's an extreme thing, but we all can get a little bit of egotistical about our work and just really feel like, oh, that's my favorite sentence. You can't change that. Or I can't possibly take this paragraph out. But as an editor once told me many years ago, and I'm very grateful for that advice, even if it's your favorite paragraph, your favorite sentence, your favorite word, whatever it may be. If it isn't moving your story forward, take it out. And that's surgery that hurts sometimes because we get real personal with the thing we're writing. It's a part of us, and we're laying it out there for the world to look at. And I think sometimes that's why it's difficult to let an editor look at something, because deep down, they're probably going to find some things that you don't want to hear. I remember the first writers conference I ever went to, beginning writers conference, many, many years ago. And we each were supposed to send in something for them to critique first, so it would be ready when we got there on the first day of the conference. And I went there thinking it's going to be so fun because I know they're just going to tell me how wonderful it is. And I'll probably have offers to have it published, and maybe an agent will even sign me like Sharon Elliott. I love her, by the way. Instead, I got there and they handed everything back out, and I looked at it, and it looked like it was bleeding. I mean, it was just, there was red marks everywhere. It was just red. And I thought, how in the world could there possibly be this many corrections? How bad could it possibly be? And as I looked through it, I thought, wow, I need to step back and have enough humility to realize this is going to help me. And it was difficult, but I so appreciated it. And I began to recognize how desperately we all need editing. Some of us tend to edit as we go. You'll write a sentence and then you'll look at it and you'll think, oh no, I need to put a comma here. The spelling's not right, or rearrange the words. Most of us, including me, I use what I call the vomit method. You just let it all out and clean it up later. And for me, that works better because I get kind of in the flow of the creative flow of what I'm doing, and I don't lose my train of thought quite as easily. So that's sort of the way I go. But either way, you're going to need to self-edit before you even consider whether or not you're ready to move to a professional editor. One of the things that is really helpful for me, in addition to going back and doing the immediate cleanup when I've maybe finished the day's work, or I usually do that one day and then go back the next day and fix what I did the day before moving on to the next section. But when I feel like I've really got maybe just a chapter or a good strong scene, or maybe the whole thing, as good as I'm going to get it for a first draft, I will put it aside and just walk away from it for several days, maybe a couple of weeks, because I know I need to go back and read it fresh. And when you've been writing it and rewriting it and looking at it and changing things, you almost know it by heart. And so you're going to read what you think it says and not what it actually says. Whereas if you wait a couple of weeks and then come and look at it, you'll see it fresh, and you'll think, you'll be wondering what in the world you were thinking when you wrote this, and yet it sounded fine a couple of weeks ago. So I really encourage you to put a little space between yourself and your work when you go in to do that self-edit. And one of the other things that really helps me a lot is to read it aloud, particularly if it's fiction. You don't want your readers having a bumpy ride. You want it to be smooth. And so when you read it out loud, you can kind of hear that. It even helps to record it while you're reading it out loud, and then play it back to yourself. And then you know what the reader's absorbing when they listen or read it. This is really so important in dialogue. People speak in contractions. Let's face it, they just do. We don't speak real formally, and yet a lot of times I'll get something where it calls for informal dialogue, and yet it is formal and stilted, and it just doesn't sound natural. So that's where the reading it out loud really helps. And if you have someone you trust and feel comfortable with to read it to them, that's helpful too. They can tell you, that just doesn't sound right for some reason. So I really find that helpful to me for the natural flow. But also one of the other things, and it can, if it's done right, it's a great thing, is dialects. Maybe I'm working on, of all things, I never thought I'd be doing this right now, but someone asked me to write a cowboy romance novella, which is really strange. We set in 1890 back in Amarillo, Texas. So I'm working on that, and I've got one character, an old guy named Cranky, and he speaks like an old guy would in 1890 in Amarillo, Texas. And I have to really watch, because obviously at the end of a word like talking, speaking, going, laughing, the G is replaced with an apostrophe, because that's how he would say it. And sometimes he'd say y'all and he'd say ain't. Well, and that's great, except then you have to be consistent. I have to go back and check that real close. Did I miss that? Do I have him saying ain't here and then aren't or something over here where it's the same exact case, but I just haven't caught it? So those dialects are really, really important. And I find it to be one of the things that when I edit for other people that I find most often missing is that understanding of how important it is to track that all the way through. They understand that it's important that they have the dialect in there to make the character realistic, but they just haven't gone back and really made sure that it carries through all the way. So that's something that I always look for when I start doing editing for someone. We all need to be, as I mentioned earlier, be honest with ourselves about our talent and our expertise and or lack thereof. When I went to that writers conference, I had zero professional experience. I mean, I'd been writing off and on as a hobby and I enjoyed it, but that's not the same. That was just the beginning of my professional training. And I'm so thankful that I was able to get that. We all need honest input from established professionals, not just our moms, because my mom always loved everything I wrote. She was my greatest fan. No matter what it was, she thought it was great. And here's the hard one. And all you English teachers, forgive me, but an English teacher isn't the best editor, especially for a book. What we all learn from our English teachers, and God bless them, I'm so thankful for it, but what we learned way back, especially way back when I was in school, that's a long time ago, does not apply to book publishing here in the United States today. It just doesn't work. There's one hard and fast rule that I can't drum into you hard enough. If you are going to write a book to be published in the United States, if that's your primary goal, I'm not saying exclusive. If it goes worldwide, that's great. But it has one rule that never changes, and that's all periods, all commas, always, without exception, go inside the closing. Why can't I say the word? Quotation mark. Inside the closing quotation mark. And I just get that constantly with it outside, and I'll mention it and I'll say, yeah, but I saw that on Jeopardy, on one of their clues, it was outside. Well, they aren't publishing a book, and that's a very different thing. If you are serious about book publishing, you need to every year be picking up the most current edition of the Chicago Manual of Style. You can buy it anywhere online, Amazon, anywhere you want to go, any bookstore. If they're one of the few brick and mortar stores that are still available around here. The Chicago Manual of Style comes out, I believe, in the fall of each year. And the reason it comes out so often is because they're always changing the rules. I wish they didn't. I don't always like it or agree with it, and it drives me crazy sometimes, but there's no other way to know it except to buy the most recent one. Now, true, when you publish with an editor, a traditional editor, they will have an in-house editor that will go through, a traditional publisher, I'm sorry. They'll have an editor who's going to go through your material, and they know all about the Chicago Manual of Style. That's their job. But how much better an impression do you make if you send your manuscript in showing that you already know that too? They feel like they're dealing with a professional then. It might be a small thing. It doesn't change the actual writing style or how good the story is, but it does make a difference in impression. So I can't stress that hard enough. Now, if you're not really looking at doing books, if you're looking at magazine articles, newspaper articles, that sort of thing, you'll want to have the AP style book. It too comes out every year. I keep both because you never know which you might be working with. And it is slightly different. And in fact, every magazine and every newspaper has certain in-house styles that are somewhat different from the AP. But as long as you have your AP or your Chicago book on hand and can look at it, you go with, if you don't know what that particular publisher wants specifically, go with what the book says, and they'll know that you did your homework. So that's really part of self-editing. You need to know those things. There's an old Hebrew proverb that if you're walking down the street and someone comes up and calls you a jackass, you ignore them. But if a whole lot of people keep walking by and they're all telling you you're a jackass, perhaps it's time to buy a saddle. Now, I mention that because when you give your work out to people to read and you're looking, whether it's for beta readers, editors, whatever it is, you're going to get a bazillion different opinions back. You can't change your work for every single opinion that comes in. But if several are saying something similar, maybe you really do need to sit down and look at that. And I caution you with that because you will always get at least one person who comes up with something that's going to, it's out of left field. And if you think, wow, they really know what they're talking about, maybe I do need to drastically change this. You could drastically change it and then have everybody else come back and say, oh, I don't like this. I like the first one. And there you are. So look, I'm not saying discount one person's opinion, but really weigh it against other opinions. And that's why you want more than one of what other people are saying. Look for a trend, look for something similar that people are saying. Now, if you're at a place where you feel like I have done all the self-editing I can possibly do, and there does come a point where you have to stop. I mean, we can change our piece 1,000 times and it keeps us from having to actually submit it and risk getting rejected. So it's real easy to do that, get caught up. There does come a point where you have to say, I think I've done the best I can do on this. Now, do I need to actually get it to a professional editor before I send it for publication? And of course, let's face it, some of that's going to depend on what you can afford to spend. Some editors are extremely expensive. I have a heart for you guys, our little Diamond Valley group here, that I always give special discounts to members. I definitely charge more for other projects. And so I understand that can be a difficult thing for people. But you just have to kind of just look at it and decide whether or not you really feel you need that. What I often ask people to do if they're not sure, I'll say, okay, don't send me your whole manuscript. Send me a chapter or maybe a couple of chapters and I will actually do a few pages of free editing for you so that you can get a feel for what I'm how I work, what I do. And you may decide, you know what, I really don't think this is going to work for us, not a good fit. And you haven't lost money in the process. And I know a lot of editors who will do that, will do several pages for you just so you can get a feel for it. It's worth doing that just to find out. Now, you may look at it and go, wow, I love what this person is doing. And maybe I can work out a payment plan or do something to get them to help me fix this and polish it until it's done all the way. So it's just kind of a personal decision you'll have to make when you get to that point. I hope that the people there's some of you out there that we have worked together. And I hope that you feel like it was well worth it. I know that I enjoyed it so much, reading stories and getting to know all of you that I work with on a more personal basis, and some of your family and the type of stories that you tell. I have one thing I'm going to say here, and those people I just was bragging about loving to get to know are going to throw shoes at me, but that's the advantage of Zoom instead of being in person. I really can't encourage you enough to learn how to use track changes. Okay, I don't hear any screaming. I'm glad that we've got mute on, because I know there's a couple of you that just wanted to pull your hair out when we, and it's my mistake to just start using track changes and assuming the writer knows what that is. Once you learn it, it's the easiest possible way to edit yourself and have other people edit, and you can have several people doing something on one manuscript without it being a horrible mess, because each person that works on it is going to have a different color of changes down there. And when you send your manuscript to, especially if it's a traditional publisher, your editor is going to send it back with track changes, and you need to know what to do with it. You don't need to know how to accept each individual change or reject it, and what to do about the little comments on the side. It's kind of a pain. And when you don't know it, I apologize for people who had to learn it as we went. But if you practice it when you're not in a hurry, you're not on deadline, and use something that you don't care if you accidentally delete a paragraph that you wish you hadn't, but practice on it. Go onto your computer and just spend the time getting to just look up track changes and follow it through on a manuscript. And by the time you spend a couple hours with it, you'll think, why did I never, ever do this before? I just see Karen's comment. Kathy has edited 3 books for me, and she is wonderful. And yes, I need to learn more about track changes. And George has probably left the room by now. He's probably so disgusted with me. I know that's not true. But we had our little episodes with track changes, and that's why I brought it up, so that we will now discuss it before we do an edit. Yes, we are. Before we start on a project, I'll say, do you know track changes? Do you want to learn track changes? If you don't, I'll use the old-fashioned form. I'll highlight things and I'll put little comments in there. But it's to your advantage to really use that. I can't stress that strongly enough. Okay, before we move on to research, if there's questions, I'm going to take them all at the end on both topics. I hope that's okay. I want to talk a little bit about the need for research as well. Obviously, nothing beats doing on-site research. It's when you first start writing, it's why we're always told, write what you know, and it is the best way to learn. I would never want to start my first book in another country I've never been to and have no chance of going there, or in a historical time that I wasn't alive. So I think my first novel was written centered in Ventura, California, where I was born and raised, and it was in the current time. But that's changed since then. I've learned to do books in foreign settings at different time periods. So again, nothing beats on-site research, but sometimes you just can't do that. It's just not possible. And even if you can, it's really not enough. You need to do more research besides. Now, in the old days, when I first started writing, if I signed a contract to do a book set in, well, like my Cowboy novella that I'm working on, 1890 in the Panhandle of Texas. Okay. That meant library days. I packed a lunch and I went to the library and I spent the whole day there. And it was actually kind of fun. I do miss that to a degree, but I have to admit that is a thing of the past. Now I go online. I do my research online. I do as much as I possibly can of that research online, so I get a good feel for where I'm going to go with the thing. And of course, there'll be instances as I move through the project that I'll have to look up a certain item again. But once I have the basics down from my internet research, my next step is to find a human being who will work with me. Now, I realize I'm not going to find anybody who was around in 1890, but I may have someone who's an expert about the Panhandle at that time. If it's a book, for instance, I wrote a book called No Greater Love. Some of you have read that. It was set in South Africa in 1989, just prior to the fall of apartheid and the release of Nelson Mandela from prison. I had always been fascinated with that when it was going on, horrified in some ways. And I kept a lot of newspaper clippings. I had all sorts of research. And I foolishly thought I knew enough about it that I could go in and just start writing. And so I did. But in the interim, as I was working on the manuscript, I met through social networking a man who lived there, who had lived there for many, many years. He was a pastor of a large church there. But during the time where my story was set, he was an ambulance driver. Now that's going to be some real firsthand information. And he graciously agreed to, at no charge, other than an acknowledgement in the book, to go through it with me and look for things that would make it more realistic. And so I'd draft a chapter, I'd email it to him, he'd go through it, he'd send it back, and I'd read his suggestions and changes. And it worked really, really well. I got so much invaluable information. For instance, I opened the book in January of 1989. What I did not know as I'm working through this entire chapter at this time period was that in South Africa, they have a particular beetle called the Sonbisi beetle that, for whatever reason, it's always been this way and everybody over there knows it, begins to kind of sing or hum the 1st of January. And this continues throughout the month until about the end of the month, and it stops. They aren't sure why, but what they have noticed is if the sound ever stops, they become so used to it that if the sound actually stops for a few minutes, they all stop and look around and think, what's going on? Because it's usually something is happening. And so here I was writing an entire chapter in South Africa in January when I should have had the Sonbisi beetle singing, and I had heard nothing about them. For some reason in my research, did not come across them. That was invaluable to me to get that written into my opening chapter, because otherwise people who have been there or who live there would read that and say, she's never set foot in this place. No matter how carefully I tried to set the geographical setting, they would know I hadn't been there. Another thing that happened in that same book, I had an interracial romance going on, a 16-year-old Black woman and the Afrikaner rancher's son who was white. And when they were just beginning to talk with one another, she would look at him. I would have her looking at him. And he wrote back and said that would not happen. She would not have lifted her eyes to look at him, not at least not in the early parts of their relationship, just would not have done it. It was absolutely forbidden. So these were the realistic things that I could not have learned. Maybe I could have if I'd have kept doing online research and come across it, but it was so much more helpful to get it from a human being. I had another book called Red Ink that was set in China in modern days. And I did a lot of research on that. But again, it was a person who had lived there for so many years, was back in the States right now, but went back and forth quite often, who helped me tremendously work through that chapter by chapter of that book. And in fact, some of the comments I got afterwards was how realistic it was and how obvious it was that I had spent many years there. I have never set foot there. So I really give credit to those people who worked with me on that research. It was so helpful. I did another series on human trafficking, about which I knew absolutely zero when I started. It was my publisher who called me and said, would you consider doing a fiction series on the topic of human trafficking with children? And to be perfectly honest, I was horrified. I thought, no, why would I want to do that? That sounds awful. She said, just please consider it, pray about it, think about it, do some research, get back to me, let me know what you think. So I did just that. I started thinking and praying and calling and talking with people. And I got a hold of an investigative reporter who worked with a newspaper near the border. And he said, oh, I'd be more than happy to work with you. I'd love to read it, because he said, this is just absolutely awful what goes on down here with these children. He said, when I started researching, and he was an older guy, he said, I have researched some of the most awful topics you can ever imagine, but nothing equaled this. He said, I was down at the border interviewing one of the agents. And as we were talking, there was one of the agents had been acting as an undercover contact. And this man came over across the border, bringing a child to be sold. Well, because of the undercover work, they anticipated this and they caught him at the border. That child he was going to sell was 18 months old. To be sold into prostitution at 18 months old. That man said, I just hit the ground weeping. He said, I couldn't stand it. He said, yes, they saved this baby. All I could think about was how many did they not save? How many have gotten by? And that's when he kind of went on a crusade and began to write about this. So he was a huge help to me, not only in writing the series, but in convincing me that, yes, I did need to move forward with this. Anything we could do to get this out for people to understand how horrible it is, how widespread it is, and what things we can individually do to try to stop it. It was worth it. And it was a dark series. It was hard for me to write. There were times I had to just get up and walk away from my laptop and just go outside and get some sunshine, because it was just horrible. And there were times I just wanted to quit. And then I think, if it's that hard for me to write, what about these poor children who are living through it? So this man helped me so much to get this done. And I can't tell you how invaluable his help was. I've worked with law enforcement, with medical people. And I have yet to find anyone, as long as they were physically able and had the time, who would say, no, I won't help you. They were all happy to do so. No one ever asked for payment. A couple of them, as I mentioned, wanted to get mentioned in acknowledgements. And of course, I would want to do that anyway. So that kind of help was just absolutely huge. And if you can find someone in the legal field, that's really helpful too. Because sometimes if you're doing a topic that's controversial, such as whether it's human trafficking or whatever it may be, you want to make sure you stay in the legal guidelines. I pushed the guidelines sometimes, but I stayed inside. And so for that reason, I'm really encouraging you to consider going to as many people as you can find. And I found that that pastor, I don't know if I mentioned this, on a social media network. So the people are there, they're readily available for the most part. And if you're having trouble finding somebody, talk to somebody, and you talk to your group, your writers group about it. I'll bet somebody has actually contacted. There must be at least one or two people who know someone who can help you in that particular area. So, and that is all I put together because I wanted to leave time to chat. I assume everybody can turn their mute button off and ask questions. Is that okay, Jolene?
That's fine.
Okay.
Does
You've got the chat thing. There's about 8 people there.
no? That's
Okay.
That's great, Kathy. Thank you. One of the things small things that helps me edit is using the search and find. I have a terrible time with certain words that
Mhm.
that creep in and repeat themselves ad nauseum.
Yes.
And it's embarrassing to see that I have 1,100 that's.
Yes, yes. And just is another one. We use just for everything. And I do the same thing, and I'm looking, I wrote it 7 times on this one page, for heaven's sakes, you know, what was I thinking?
Yes.
So you're right. Search and find thing is invaluable.
And you touched on it a little bit, but how did you find most of your sources for information?
Okay, yeah, the one I said was social networking. The person who had been in China for many years, I met at our church, and others were people who I would ask around to other writers, editors, publishers, or if I knew someone in law enforcement, they would help me find somebody that could help me with that. In the medical field, you know, my daughter-in-law's a nurse, and so she was able to help me find people who would work with me in that. So take advantage of the contacts you already have. Somebody will know somebody who can meet that need that you have for research.
So that's the 7 steps of connection.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to say something about very briefly in defense of English teachers, since I was one for 42 years.
Mhm.
Actually, but I think you hit on an interesting point about English teachers. English teachers are not professional writers, and they're
Mhm.
teaching something other than professional writing.
Exactly.
And as a result, most English teachers are not very good at writing fiction. They just aren't. And even that said, not very many will, at least on the high school and community college level, are really even doing article writing or anything of that sort.
Mhm.
That they do tend to be, it seems to me, teaching something different than professional writing, which is fine because they have a certain thing to teach.
Mhm.
I mean, as a writer, it took me a long time. I mean, I was in my 40s before I sold my first article.
Mhm.
And and I had to learn to write differently.
Yes.
But you know what? Interestingly enough, it taught me to teach differently.
Yeah, that's true.
And so
Can I add something?
Yeah.
We taught at the same high school.
Oh, neat.
And I had kids that would say, we had a drama teacher and a speech teacher who loved, expressive stuff, but was not real good at sitting down and really helping kids understand how to write better.
Yeah.
And I had kids say to me, I wish I'd had your husband, because he would take them individually and sit with them and correct stuff. Because I remember when I was in school, I just get a paper that was bleeding and had no idea. Okay, so now what do I do
about this? Yeah.
But he would sit with each kid in class
that's
and
wonderful.
really show them what was wrong and what they needed to do. So I don't think there's a lot of English teachers that are doing that.
I also, believe it or not, I taught them professional rules of writing, like avoiding passives and things of that sort.
Right.
So that I approached it a little different. That's what I'm saying. Becoming a professional writer made me teach differently. I also want to say something you hit on too that I think is important about rules for writing. Every publishing house, it seems, has its own set of rules.
Yes, they do. That's
and
true.
You need to really know, and I think you hit on this, and I reinforce it because I sold a Western to an English publisher, and they came out with, I got like 5 pages of how to do my manuscript.
Oh, wow.
Including not using ing words to start sentences.
Oh.
To limit those to very, very few. So I'm just saying that you hit on part that I found really important, and and I found out that firsthand, and I think that's a good point that you made there.
Good. Yes, and you're right. Each publisher has their own in-house style. So that's all you can do is go with the Chicago Manual style or the AP style if you don't know that particular publisher. And at least they'll know that you did your homework, and then it's a lot easier to transition because their style won't be that much different from the books.
Okay, if anybody has a question, please do the little hand thing so I can see your hand, because I can't see everybody on screen right now. So does anybody have another question or a point that you'd like to make? Yes, Ellen. You just need to unmute.
I just unmuted myself.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. And as one of the editors of Straight Jackets magazine, first of all, I wanted to say that there are a couple of tools that are really helpful for writers. Pro Writing Aid and Grammarly are a couple of tools you can use, and they can grab some of the obvious errors. And as editor of Straight Jackets magazine, we would hope that our writers would use these tools. Even though we do edit, we like to get a clean manuscript and as professional as possible. So I would recommend either one of those. And do you have anything to say about those, Kathy?
They're wonderful. Yeah. I mean, I honestly, the first few years I was writing, as soon as they were available, put it that way, I started using them, and I don't always, but they still are very helpful. Any of the helps that you can take advantage of, even if I don't care how long you've been writing, there's always something you can absorb from that, and there's some help that it will give you. So yeah, those are, and I've heard people that are new writers telling me, I love those programs. So
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like to say that I feel the same way. There's quite a few programs. I happen to use Pro Writing Aid, which I find a great additional editor, along with the Read and Critique group. That I'm fortunate that our Read and Critique group is very good. A lot of published authors in it, and
that's good.
They're very good. I would like to say about Read and Critique groups, they can be very, very good. They can also be very, very bad if you don't have people who know what they're doing.
True.
But if you have a reading critique that people really know what they're doing and have been a success at it, I think they can be very, very valuable.
You're right.
George has something he wants to say.
Hi, George.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on Kathy's coverage of research. And one thing that didn't get brought up, I use Google Maps and Google Earth because most of my stuff is centered in San Francisco. So I can go into San Francisco and go down to a specific address and move all the way down onto the street, and I know exactly what that street looks like.
That is
in
so
some
true.
cases, I can go inside of a building, like a restaurant, and I know what it looks like inside. I can see the menu and use all that, and it's as authentic as if I'd been right there. So that is a great tool.
I'm writing that down because I had forgotten. You're right. That's a great way to go.
Okay. Anybody else have another question or point that you'd like to make? Come on, give me something.
Kara, unmute yourself, Kara.
Kara, I didn't see her.
She's down below.
Okay,
there you
I
are.
was wondering, and this is kind of for everyone, but for Kathy, since how do you, if you've published over 50 books, how do you make a schedule for that, for the time that it takes how do you make a writing schedule? Because I struggle because my days are full.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of it depends too. I mean, if you're writing full time, obviously you have the luxury of spending a lot more time writing. If you have actually another type of job or even a life apart from writing, you still I mean, I'm retired supposedly, and I keep finding myself still almost as busy as I ever was. I do write fast because I've long since given up I don't believe in writer's block. I have a block of wood that says writer's block on it. And if I get stuck, I just turn it over and keep going, because you have to treat it like any job. You can't wait for the muse to whisper. If you're serious about writing, you can say, you know what, I'm not turning this thing off today until I've written 1,000 words or 3,000 words or whatever it might be. If it's start small, 500 words, but do it today. I don't know. Some of us are morning people. Some of us are evening people. I'm morning. By 3 or 4 or 5 in the afternoon, my brain's gone. I'm done for the day. So, but I know other people are the other way around. They just can't do anything when they start, and they do better at night. So really the schedule is up to you, but be honest and then keep yourself honest. Just seriously, short of a national emergency or, a personal emergency, do set those goals for yourself. There was a time for a while when I was writing 4 books a year, 4 novels, and they were all books that needed research. And so of course I do write fast, and that helped, but there were some long days. Now, newspaper writing, which is something I did for a while, really taught me to write on time and on focus. Kept me, no matter what was going on around you, you're still writing. You have to do it now. And people tell me, what inspires you to write? I said, deadlines, because if you don't meet your deadline, you don't get paid, So it's one of the best inspirations there is. And I know there's times that it just comes really easily and you're just flowing, and other times when you're struggling. But when you're having those days of struggling, you can't get started, write something, write anything. Even if you have to throw it away later, it will get you going, get you started writing.
Okay.
My block of wood says writer's block on one side, and on the other side it says discipline.
I love it. Yes, that's true.
Yeah, I would like to just add that my first 2 books I wrote were nonfiction, and I had contracts on both of them. And I was teaching high school and community college at the same time.
Oh, wow. Mm.
And I forced myself every morning to get up at 5 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote from 5 to 6. Then I got ready for school. And I
That's
did
good.
it every single school day. I did it that way. It was hard.
Sure.
But that's how I got started writing my first 2 books. And my wife would tell you, I mean, alarm would go off and I'd get up and I would work for that hour, and that'd be it.
Good.
I think you're right, Kathy. I think the real thing, or Joe said it, the idea is discipline, and you have to find that time and you make it.
Yeah. And like I said, it's different for everybody when that time is, but we have to carve it out. If we don't do that, it will always just be a fun hobby, and there's nothing wrong with a fun hobby. But if we want to be professional, we want to get recognized as such and get published, you got to put in that discipline. It's hard work. It is really hard work. And, there's times when I know I need to sit down and write, and all of a sudden I'll think maybe I should go mop the floor. I don't like to mop the floor, but all of a sudden it sounds preferable to writing those 5,000 words. So you just have to drag yourself sometimes by the hair of the head and sit yourself. I have what I practice the Bic writing method, but in chair. Do not get up and go do something else. Stay in that chair and write something. And it's, I guess that's just the discipline of the whole thing, is just saying, okay, I'm here. I'm a professional. I'm going to do this job. If I sold shoes for a living, I couldn't wait until I felt like I was in the mood to do that. I would have to sell shoes when I'm supposed to sell shoes. So I think that's really the message, is the discipline, and you have to take yourself seriously if you want someone else to take you seriously. So
I do have a question. A point. Hemingway wrote 500 words a day in the morning, and that was his limit. Do you have a limit of words that you tend to write in a day? I mean, you mentioned several limits, but I'm just wondering if you have a personal limit.
I have written as many as 7,000 or 8,000 in a day, and it was horrible. My brain was scrambled when I finished, but I had to for a specific deadline. Normally, when I'm normally writing, especially when I was doing the 3 books a day or a year or 4 books a year, it was more like 4,000 or 5,000 a day. But I'm much more comfortable with 2,000 or 3,000. That's a comfortable amount for me to write every day.
Okay.
Dennis had a question.
Yes.
Dennis?
My question is twofold. One is Grammarly, and do you use both of them, Grammarly and ProWriting Aid? And the other question is, do you have a checklist in your mind, or did you have a checklist that you created at one point to be able to edit your work to kind of help you stay focused on things? And talk about that if you would.
Like I said, I have used those programs. I don't use them all the time, but yes, I have used them. And I think they're really great ones. Do I have a checklist? Okay, I have a confession to make. I'm one of those fly by the seat of my pants writers. Even though I have a train of thought writing book where I mapped everything out, and that's how I teach other people, kind of those do as I say, not what I do. But I do have those things that I go back to. And if you have my train of thought writing method book, I know a couple of you do, that outlines it. Yeah, thank you. That outlines it. And those are things that I would go back and check. I think the biggest thing for me is that space of time when I'm done writing until I'm ready to go back and start self-editing. I'll jot things down as I'm going. Oh yeah, I got to check on this or I do whatever, because I'm going back with it fresh. And that's really pretty much the only checklist I have. Now there are some things, obviously, if I get ready to send a manuscript off to, well, actually I don't go through the publisher, go through my agent. And I hope you heard me mention that Sharon's wonderful. You got a great agent there. I love Sharon. Even to an agent, they're going to want a certain thing. If they ask for a proposal, I have to know what that proposal, I know what a proposal is. I know that that's going to entail the part I hate, the information about me and what I plan to do to market the books. It used to be years ago, it was just all about what the book was about. Now they want at least a 30-year proposal needs to be, how are you going to market the book? And why do you see that this is important? What are similar books done in the market? And why is yours different than similar books? And why are you qualified to write about this when, rather than someone else doing it? That's the part I hate. I love writing everything else. Writing the story is simple for me. It's doing that part that I really struggle with, and I have to force myself to do it. But I know that's mandatory now. If you do a proposal, that's what they want. So that's really, I have to say, I am a fly by the seat of my pants writer, because when someone wants me to do particularly with a novel, I've had a couple of publishers say, can you, they're willing to give me a contract based on 2 or 3 sample chapters and a detailed synopsis, but one publisher actually wanted a chapter by chapter summary. And I said, I know where I'm starting with this book and I know where I'm ending up, but honestly, I'm surprised by everything that happens in between. I don't always know. I just, I wish but my characters tend to surprise me. Things happen. And so that I just almost gave up a contract over that. That's how, and finally they agreed to kind of work with me on that, and I didn't have to actually do it. But that's, if I were that kind of a detailed writer, and this is a generalization, and I don't mean to be politically incorrect, but men are much better at doing that. For the most part, men follow a plot. They've got all this figured out in their brains, and they will most of the time invent characters to make their plot happen. For the most part, women go the other way. We everything is about our characters. It's all about them and how they change and what happens to them, what they feel. And so the things that happen because of who our characters are. And again, that's a generalization, but that usually tends to be the case.
Hey, Dan, you have a question. And hello, Dan. How are you today?
Dan, where are you at, Dan?
There we go. So many moving parts. I'll lower
Yes.
my hand too. I'm great. I hope everybody else is too. I had 2 questions. One is, you mentioned that I assume it's a software, the change tracking. Is that something that runs on a computer? Is it in the cloud?
Are you talking about the train of thought writing method, or?
No, you were talking about editing, and there's something, I guess, that tracks your changes.
Oh, track changes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's in
that
your
software, I take it.
You've got it. If you're writing doing Word documents, you've got it. It's in there. You just I can't remember what the headline is. I should have looked at what it says up top. But it's something like references or changing or whatever. You click on that, and then you'll find a place that says track changes, where you can turn them on or off. If you turn them on, then every time you make a change, it highlights it at a certain color. And if you want to write it, type out as a comment to someone, like when you're editing, it'll put it out in the side here. And then when the author gets it back, they may agree or not agree with the change you've made, so they can hit accept or reject the change. And then that will erase what you put in there. So you end up with a clean manuscript when you're done, but it's a little intimidating if you're not, not used to doing it that way. But then, as I said, if you're going through a traditional publisher, you may have two editors looking at it. You may have a proofreader over here, and they're all working on this. And so they each have a different color for their input. So you kind of know where it came from.
Okay. So you have to be using Microsoft Word. I happen to
As far as I know.
Yeah, I happen to be on Linux and I use Scrivener anyway. Do you work with anybody that uses Scrivener? Because it does something like
I haven't. Does anybody else have it? I've not worked with that. No.
Okay. Now I do, for the critique group, I do export as a Word document, but I'm not sure that all the features are there when I do that. So that's something that we'd have to try.
Right.
The other thing is, I would like to work with you. Are you going to post your contact information, or is something I should jot down now?
Yes, don't let me forget. I will give that to all of you, sure, whenever you want me to. Okay.
Okay.
Before we finish, yes.
Ellen, you have a question.
I do. So this may seem overly simple. Oh, and let me just go back to track changes. I looked it up while you were talking, Kathy.
Good.
Under the review tab, so you go to Word,
Review.
it's under the review tab, click on track changes, and then change simple markup to all markup.
Very good. Thank you. That's it.
So this may seem like a very simple question, but if it doesn't move your story forward, take it out. Can you say more about that? Because I'm thinking about like location description, character description. So what stays in, what goes out?
And that can actually move story forward too. You have to have you have to have some description of your setting and the characters. But it can become tedious. Sometimes people try to work too much in, especially in the beginning. And, years ago, authors could do that. You pick up a book by one of the classic authors, and you may have 4 or 5 pages of setting a scene descriptiveness before anything even happens. Well, that would not fly today. Those people as wonderful as they would never get a contract. We live in a society where people have very short attention spans. You got to throw them into the action and let the other stuff unfold as you go. We just don't have the luxury of several pages of descriptiveness anymore. It's just, you may say just enough to put them in the right, let the reader know where you are. Maybe you're on an island, or maybe you're in a certain town or something. But beyond that, you just work it in as you go. That way it's moving it forward. If the reader is stalled and reading all this stuff, even if the reader's interested in it, most of them aren't, your story's not moving forward. So just make sure the pace keeps going. I don't mean you have to be so fast that you lose readers or you leave them breathless, but we have to keep in mind that we're competing with people who watch things on they're streaming everything on their TVs and they've got it on their phones, and things are happening at a really fast pace. And we want to keep new readers, people that are, most of us that are on here today, we're not young people, and we probably don't even qualify for middle age anymore. I know I don't. And we love to read. I love to hold a book, although I read on Kindle too. But my kids less and less, and my grandkids look at me like I'm a dinosaur if I even suggest it. And we have to keep them. We have to adapt to our readership, that we can't ask them to adapt to us. And so they want to read at a fast pace, keep them moving.
Okay.
I ran into that situation with my book number 3, Heroin, Lobsters, and Pandas with Wang. And Marge Charlier started to read the book, and she quit after chapter 3 because it was chapter 4 before my main character actually showed up. And so I've been challenged to go back and rewrite it and move everything all around, whether I want to do it or not. So you got to watch that.
Yep, very good point.
So Sandy, you're next. You're muted too.
Ta-da! And
There you
we
are.
could be middle age if life expectancy is 150, 160.
There you go.
Does
There
that
you
work?
go.
Okay.
That works for me.
I was curious about the differences between developmental editors, copy editors, proofreaders, and so on. Could
Good
you
point.
speak to that a little bit, please?
Sure, I've done some of each, but the developmental editor you want relatively early on if you can. If not, it's just probably going to require a lot of rework and what George is talking about, rearranging things. As a developmental editor, you're reading through to see if there's any holes in it, if it's logical, the progression, anything that you might see that isn't going to work, and it probably is going to require some rewriting. The line editor is more looking for whether or not the things that we talked about, is the dialogue authentic to who's speaking? Can we make that change? Are we missing certain things here or there? Anything you can do to better polish and improve it. And then the proofreader is looking for punctuation, spelling, that sort of thing. So all levels are important, and you probably need all three at some point. But sometimes you just have to evaluate which need the worst or the most, I should say.
Okay, Mary, you're next.
Hi, yeah, I really perked up when you mentioned the thing about human trafficking, because I'm working with a woman, I'm ghostwriting a book by a woman who was trafficked herself at a very young age, and she was still turning tricks in Honolulu at the age of 50. Talk about middle age.
Wow.
Yeah, so I might reach out to you later about, because some of the things I get stuck on is, okay, I'll put something in there that sounds like me and not her. Luckily, I have a great critique group that busts me on that stuff.
Right.
But I don't want to have, and one of the big themes is post-traumatic stress.
Yes.
Right.
That's huge.
So making it entertaining for people to read, but you don't want to give them secondhand trauma. So the way, because that's such a heavy subject. So I might ask you later about that. But I also wanted to mention one quick thing about, since we're talking on track changes, and Daniel mentioned he used Linux. I like to use Google Docs because it's free and online. It's great for collaborating, which I do a lot of. And that has a feature where you can share with someone, and they can edit or suggest changes, and then you can say, okay, a bit like the.
Oh, good. I wasn't aware of that. That's great.
Yeah, and Google Docs has come a long way since it first came out, in terms of spell checking, grammar, and all that stuff. Like, it didn't even used to have a table of contents, but it's gotten so much better. Even the dictation, like, I can talk, and it's, before you had to use dragon speech and all that, but I could do 5,000 words with just talking, and it's gotten so much better. That's my little plug for using Google Docs. But I'm like you, I'll use more than one. Like, if I want to really double check, I'm going to use Word, I'll copy and paste. But for collaborating, it's but when you put your information into the chat later, whatever, I especially like to know your recommendations for. You said it was a fiction project, but it was like a series of books, and because that's amazing that they did that fiction.
Yeah, I turned it into a fiction series. Yeah. Excuse me.
Okay, I want to check that out. Thank you.
I think my husband's getting ready to go out to the golf course. That's him there.
That's funny.
All right. I have. Oh yeah. Okay. Karen, you have a question you want to?
Well, am I?
Mary, I'm sorry. Mary, were you finished?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Mary, were you finished? Okay, good. All right.
Okay.
Okay, Karen.
One of the things that Kathy had to bring to my attention several times was short sentences, and yet you talk about the young people wanting to do things quickly, and I had always thought, I learned that you should mix it up, long sentences, short sentences, mix it up. But then the other day I read just a couple of pages from a book where the guy has 80 books out, and it was just like short sentence, short sentence, short sentence. Wow. And I wondered about that. And so could you speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, sure. And in fact, what you said about the alternating, that's what I really want to see people do. When you write nothing but short sentences, particularly for like a couple of paragraphs, your reader may not know why, but they're irritated by that time. And we purposely do that. If, say, you're introducing a character and you don't really want to say, hey, this is a bad guy, but you want your reader to kind of suspect something's about this guy isn't quite right. You introduce him with nothing but short sentences, and from that moment on, they don't trust him. It's really an amazing thing. But yes, you want to alternate. You don't want too many long sentences, but you don't want to hit them with bullets either. You don't want to be machine gunning them with short sentences. So you can give them a couple, and then you do a compound sentence or something to make it flow. Those of you who are poets at heart will have no problem with that, because you'll listen to it, you'll read it out loud, and you'll know, oh, I need 2 more beats in that sentence. But for other people, just trust me when I tell you, alternate them. Never more than 3 short sentences in a row. That's pushing it, maybe 2. But then do something a little longer in between, so it isn't a bumpy ride. I come back to that, I know it, but the Train of Thought book talks about that. Don't give your reader a bumpy ride. So hope that
Okay, and
helps.
I have one other question. Is it possible to teach someone when to use that and when not to use that?
Well,
The word that, I mean.
Yeah, I know, I hate that word. In fact, I guess I should say, if you figure that out, let me know.
Okay.
I still struggle with it. I try to leave it out. My standard is, if I read the sentence and it makes sense without the that, leave it out. If you and it doesn't make sense, or it's maybe not, at least not clear, and there's more than, it's a bit ambiguous because of it, put it in. And that's because so many publishers don't want you to use it anymore if you can avoid it. And so I try really hard to avoid it where possible. But there are times that if you don't put it in, or rewrite the sentence entirely to a different way, you're leaving your reader not quite clear on what you just said.
Okay.
So.
That's
I have one other quick question here too. Yeah, you're talking about editing later, and I always, when I was teaching, and I believe it now as a writer too, that there is no art in writing. The art lies in the rewrite, in the second, not even the second draft, maybe the third or fourth. When you write your 2,000, let's say you write 2,000 words in a day. When you get around to editing those 2,000 words, how many of those words remain? Just on average.
Almost all of them. Maybe because I've written for so long that it's usually pretty clean, but it hasn't always been that way. And there were times in the early days, I probably threw out at least half of what I wrote, at least half, sometimes more, which is okay, because at least you got something out of it. You know, like I said, you're writing something, and especially in those days when you're struggling to spit anything out, maybe you won't keep it all. But one thing I've found too, and I don't know if this is helpful to some people or not to others, but if I'm doing a scene or a chapter, I prefer not to stop at the end of the day at the very end of that chapter, because now I've got to come up with a whole new thought to start the next day. I'll stop somewhere in between, and I'll put just enough notes to myself to know where I want that scene to finish. But it's easier to jump back in there. I reread what I have in that chapter so far, and it just automatically picks up. I just finished writing it. So that helps a lot. But right now, if I wrote 2,000 words in the day and went back the next day and looked at it, I would keep probably at least 1,900 of them.
Wow. I write 1,000 words, and I usually keep about maybe 700.
Well, that's still good. That's still a good percentage.
Well, but I tend to overwrite a lot, and I think that it's so much easier to overwrite than underwrite and then have to add.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I agree.
Okay, do I have any more questions? No.
Yes.
Oh, wow, Dan. I'm sorry, Dan. Yes, Dan.
Yeah, you didn't see my electronic hand.
There it is. I do see it now.
Yeah, I got rid of it. Anyway, I wanted to give George a little bit of hope, because I think that one of my favorite stories and movies is Psycho, which was mentioned earlier, and the protagonist does not appear in there, I think, until about the 20-minute mark. I never really timed it, but she doesn't really show up until well into the story. The one you think is going to be the protagonist gets killed off. Good point. So, and I want to compliment Kathy. I want to compliment Kathy on her refrigerator too. That is fascinating.
Yes.
Those places and
Everywhere we go, I pick up a magnet.
also, I share your love of bread too. I can't leave mine on the counter though because I eat it slowly, so I freeze some.
Yeah, I'm going to do some freezing today. We had company yesterday and they left it all here, so it's going in the freezer.
Thanks for that glimpse into your life there.
Yes, you're welcome. In fact, I had so many refrigerator magnets, I had to buy a second refrigerator. It's out on the back porch and it's covered too. So.
Kara had her hand up.
I know it's getting late, but I really want to ask this one question.
Mm-hmm.
So my style is my style of writing is all summary. I barely use any dialogue. And should I just stick with what comes naturally to me, or should I work on developing scenes? You know,
it all depends if you want to be published or not. I'll be honest. No, too much summary will get you kicked out of the competition right away. I'll tell you the best thing you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Take an acting class.
Oh my goodness.
Learn to throw yourself into another person's personality. If you don't want to do it, if you're too bashful to do it yourself, that's okay. But take the class and learn, and do it when you're at home by yourself. But it's so important. In fact, that's one of the things that helped me the most with collaborative writing, ghostwriting, putting myself in somebody else's skin, and becoming that person. So because you want to improve what they're saying, you want to make it sound good, but you want it to be them. As I remember, one of my great editing mentors told me one time, he said, when you're editing or writing for someone else, ghostwriting, whatever, if your shadow is overshadowing the work, you're standing too close, back up. And that really helped me because I have to keep remembering when I'm working for somebody else, this isn't my manuscript. Even when I'm editing, I can give you all these different suggestions, but you have every right to say, I don't agree with that. It's my manuscript. And just like you have the right to say, oh, Kara, that you can just say, I like writing summaries and I don't want to do the other. And so I'm just going to write summary. And you have every right to do that. But as I said, unfortunately, the publishers, they want action. They want dialogue. They want people to live and breathe on the pages. The summaries alone won't do it. The summaries are fine in between, intermittent, but you can't do it completely. So hope that helps.
I had that happen with Wang. I've had people that read my books and say, is this a real character? Is this a real guy? You know him so well. And
yes.
Yeah, he originally did come from a real person that became him, but he talks to me all the time. And so I know him very, very well.
Yes. They become almost your best friends sometimes, or your worst enemies.
Okay. Do I have any more questions? Dan, your hand is still up. Do you? Okay, then I'm going to take your hand down. That's it. Your hand is down, lowered. No more.
I'll ask a question. I just wonder, I'm getting to know Sharon, and I've known her since 2008, years back, but do you have any suggestions for working with an agent generally that would apply to all of us?
Oh, let's see. I've worked with several agents over the decades. It's important to find one that you track with. You don't have to agree with them on everything, but for instance, obviously, if I'm writing fiction that has nothing to do with politics, I don't have to agree politically with my agent. But if it happens to overshadow where we're looking to send the manuscripts or how they're written, it could be a problem. That's just one example of many. But now, knowing Sharon like I do, I don't think you'll have any problem there. But it's just easier for me to work with somebody that I agree with, at least on the basics of life. And I've only had one or two where that didn't happen. And it took me a while to figure out that's what the problem was. And, great guy, good agent. But we weren't two people who would sit down and have lunch together if we weren't an agent-client relationship. So for me, that's the best thing, is to make sure somebody that you feel comfortable being around and for the most part, agree with on your outlook on life.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, at this spot, hearing none, I would like to thank Kathy. Kathy, it was a great presentation. Really enjoyed it. You gave us a lot of great information, and You were wonderful as usual, so really appreciate that. We're going to end the meeting. I will say our next meeting, which is in April. Right now, I have scheduled Daniel Martin, who is a publisher, East Coast publisher of a series of a company called City Limits Books. He was with a major publisher, got laid off during the pandemic, started his own publishing business. He's got quite a few titles. He has a good, interesting staff. I've met some of them, and he's going to talk to us about publishing in the digital age, and both traditional, non-traditional, and how he got started and what's happened. He's the publisher that's going to be publishing my book, The Carney Way, which will be out in August. So,
what's his name again?
What's that?
What's his name again?
Daniel Martin, and you'll see him. Like I said, he'll be our speaker for next time. Well, everybody, it's been wonderful, and
I want to be sure and give the contact information before we turn off. I see all these notes.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. Go to my website. It's KATHI and then MACIAS.com, KathyMacias.com. You'll see a tab that says contact. You can email me from there. That's the easiest way. So it's KATHIMACIAS.com.
All right, everybody got that?
Thank you so much, Kathy. Really appreciate you.
You're very welcome.
Absolutely terrific again.
Thank
So
you.
with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody, and we will see you in April.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.